Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I just want to start by saying thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who has joined me on this journey. We've just begun with this whole raw, real, and honest journey, and I am so grateful to everyone who has watched, who has shared, who has subscribed. I thank you so much. And if you do find this content to be helpful, I would really encourage you to send it to somebody else, to let other people get in on it too. The more people that we can have in the same healing journey, that's great. And so I would encourage you to do that. So today, our topic is one of reconciliation. We've talked about forgiveness. We've talked about that. We've talked about toxic family and grief and the difficulties and the problems around Christmas. We've had a guest on to look at, to listen to a couple of her story. And then we had, Counselor Cheryl Shea, in with us and talking to us in the month before. And so as we move forward, we need to now talk about reconciliation. It's one of those things that we just take for granted. If I say I'm sorry, then we should reconcile. If you say you're sorry, then I'm obligated to continue the relationship in the same manner that it was before. Well, if you've ever been married, or if you are married, or if you've had a long-term friend, or you've had things that, relationships through the years that have lasted a period of time, and if there's some honesty and realness between you, you'll know that there's going to be arguments and there's going to be things that you disagree on. And it's what we do in the moment as much as what we do after the moment that's going to make a difference on whether or not reconciliation is even possible. So, we don't want to, first of all, in the middle of that disagreement, in the middle of that argument, we want to watch our tongue. We don't want to be saying things that we don't need to say. We don't want to be being mean or callous or rage filled. We want to make sure that we maintain an attitude of Christ as we're having the conversation. And then afterward, when we're done, we want to look at that and we want to go, hey, I forgive that person. As soon as you can do that, that's great. But we don't want to ruminate it, and especially we don't want to be going to other people and talking to them about it to get wise counsel, because it doesn't always work out that way. It can just end up being, especially if that person already has issues with the person you had the disagreement with, this whole thing can go very bad very, very quickly and ruin and end relationships for good. So being careful with what you do with the disagreement, what you do with the argument before, during, and after. Well, really during and after is really important. So the thing is what we don't want to do is we don't want to be a people pleaser in the middle of any of this. We don't want to be the kind of person that just backs down and says, you know what they did was wrong and it was harmful, but because they are this person, or, because they have a large following, because they might destroy my ministry, they might harm my ministry, they might harm my reputation. We don't want to just cower into allowing them to continue to harm us. That is not healthy and it's not helpful for you. So what we need to do is we need to look at the big picture, and we need to say, what am I looking for in this? Where am I going with this? How am I walking forward in this? What is God asking of me to do? So the thing about arguments and disagreements is there's some pretty intense emotions that come up in the middle of that argument. And so what do we do with those emotions after the argument has dissipated, after you've gone your separate ways and, you're sitting in your car? Do you have a good cry? Do you allow yourself to get angry? What do you do with those things? And so this is a big part of our healing journey, is to be able to take that and break it up and say, I'm upset because, and I'm wounded, or I had the argument because they felt like it was an attack on my character, or it was an attack on someone that I love, or, if it's just a simple argument that can be easily rectified, then why are you so upset? Did it trigger you from something that happened in your past? You need to look at those things and you need to break it up, and you need to take it to the Lord, and you need to pray about it. And like I said, go back and listen to those first few videos that I did about forgiveness so that you know how exactly to apply that and how to work that through in your own life. Dealing with your intense emotions in the moment and after the moment are really important. And I can honestly say I don't always deal with this well myself. Emotions are big things, and, sometimes they can just take us off track. So, as we look into reconciliation and as we look into some of the things about reconciliation, I want to say this. Everything that we do as we embark on this process is to bathe it all in prayer. As soon as there's this thing that's gotten in the way, it's like a sliver, it's like something that's just pierced you and you feel the pain of it, the first thing we need to do is to begin to bathe it in prayer. You need to just begin to pray. Pray for that person, pray for yourself, pray for your emotions, pray for your healing, pray for restoration if possible. These are the things we need to be looking at when we come to the Lord. How does the Lord want you to deal with it? How does He want you to proceed? What is the next course of action? Do I include anybody? Do I not include anybody? What do I say? What do I not say? We need to pray. And we need to pray about relationships that have had a bump in the road. So let's always remember that prayer is our first step all of the time. And I think the other thing we need to really remember when we talk about reconciliation is that reconciliation is not always possible. I think it's a goal to achieve, but it is certainly not always possible. So you're going to say, I can hear some voices saying, but we are Christians, so we should always be working toward reconciliation. And I go, that I honestly believe, because of what I've done for so many years, is that, in Christian circles, this is really the thing that we talk about a lot, is that reconciliation. You need to reconcile with your parent who abused you for however many years. You need to reconcile with your uncle who abused you for so many years. And no, actually, I don't know that reconciliation is often possible, or is not always possible. And we're going to look at some of the reasons why it's not always possible and what to do if it might be, and if it is possible, right? Forgiveness is unconditional. That is something that you can do. And forgiveness doesn't have to be, forgiveness takes one person. It takes you to look at the other person and say, I forgive them for wounding me. I forgive them for saying X, Y, and Z. I forgive them for doing X, Y, and Z. And working through that process, that is a one-person job. Reconciliation, on the other hand, takes two people. And in order for reconciliation to happen, that means that both people must want to come back into relationship. Both people must want healing for the hurt and the harm that has happened, and then they have to want to come together to restore the relationship. And that is one of the reasons why reconciliation is not always possible. And so it's important to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. They're two very different things. We've talked a lot about forgiveness already. And so, like I said, reconciliation is not always possible. And it's not always, it's not the same as forgiveness. You can't force forgiveness or for reconciliation. And you can't force forgiveness either, but you can step into forgiveness for yourself, and you can forgive that other person. And so you might be looking at this and going, okay, well, this is actually all makes sense, right? And I'm going to say this, like, you might be asking, why is reconciliation, even with that first thing that I talked about? You might be going, well, okay, that's great. But, how do I know if my situation actually is something where reconciliation might not be possible, right? Or when it might not be wise, to try to reconcile with someone? Well, and I would say this, right? It's unwise maybe to reconcile with a person who's done great physical harm to you or emotional harm, right? If you've been taken advantage of in any particular physical way, it might not be wise for you to try to reconcile. You can absolutely forgive 100%, and you should, but reconciliation might not be wise, right? Will they do it again? Will they get angry and harm you again? You need to look at those things as well. Forgiveness, yes. Reconciliation, maybe not so much. Now, if there is to be reconciliation in a case like this, you're going to want to see that they have changed. Not that they've said they're going to change, not that they say they have changed, but that you're actually seeing evidences of that. as people move forward, as the relationship, as you watch, as you work through the issues you're working through, have they changed? Are they still out of control when they get angry? Do they still say really hurtful things? What are the things that are happening here? You need to look at that in order to see whether reconciliation is possible, because you do not want to put yourself back into a same situation where you're going to be hurt again, or maybe even eventually hospitalized or worse, right? So you don't want to get into a situation like that. And one of the other things about reconciliation is that there has to be truth. Truth has to be at the core of the conversation and of the relationship going forward, in order, and it has to be on both sides. It has to be, both people have to come with the truth, and they have to be able to keep and maintain that truth, speak the truth, admit the truth, accept the truth, and then work through the pain that might be happening because of what has happened, right? So the truth has to be at the core for reconciliation to happen. And it's a truth that has to remain. Like I said, it can't be covered up, it can't be glossed over, it can't be ignored, it can't be never bring that up again. I'm embarrassed, I never want to talk about it. It cannot be something that we just shove in a back corner and pretend it never happened in order for reconciliation to go forward. Let's take for an example, if you're in a relationship and your spouse has had an affair on you, where you have trusted them up to that point, and now there's this great betrayal. What do you do with that betrayal? How do you manage that betrayal? In order to reestablish trust, and in order to reestablish relationship, and in order to get to the point where you can trust that person in every situation, the truth has to be present all the time. What were you doing? Where were you? Who were you with? Those are questions that are going to be happening in the beginning of that relationship. It's not healthy to keep those same questions, say 5 years down into the relationship, but you're still going to be looking for things to be reestablished so that that relationship can maintain health, right? And so there's no ignoring things, there's no passing things off. A few years ago, several years ago, I was quite young actually. I wasn't doing this yet. I wasn't even born again. And through the years, though, I knew a couple, and they had been married, remarried, married and remarried, married, divorced and remarried, I think probably 7 times to the same person. And the last time they got divorced, they said that's it, they were done. I don't know if that's truth. I've lost track of this person, but it's like, that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to keep going around that cycle. We don't want to keep going through that kind of scenario. Having said all of that, the truth is that we can never expect the other person is going to change. We cannot expect that the other person is the only person who has to change. In order for there to be true reconciliation, often change has to happen on both sides. There has to be a hearing of the other person. There has to be maybe a meeting of the other person's needs, and that goes both ways. It's not usually it's not just usually one-sided. So there has to be this breaking down of what caused the argument, the disagreement, and the disruption of relationship in the first place, so that you can actually look at those things and accept that you might need to change too. So change is not usually one-sided. That's another reason. And I would say this, though, when you have come to the point that you've been bathing this in prayer, and when you come to the place of having forgiven them, when you've come to the place where you're able to just release them into the hand of the Lord, and you're able to bless them now, you have to also stop punishing them for the things that they've done. And I see this. I have forgiven them, but I'm always going to be this way in this situation. No, you're still punishing them for what they did. And if you've really forgiven them, that means you're not punishing them anymore. It means there is no punishment involved. Jesus didn't punish us for our sin. He forgave us, and he removed it as far as the east is from the west. And so what we need to do is exactly the same thing. We need to forgive, and then we need to stop punishing that person, giving them the silent treatment, pushing them away in certain areas. And then we need to work on healing ourselves, our own emotions, and the relationship as well, if you're looking for reconciliation. But reconciliation is only possible if there is forgiveness that's exchanged, right? There has to be the asking of forgiveness, and there has to be the giving of forgiveness. So you have to give and receive forgiveness, and accept your own fault and your own wrong in the situation. This is why reconciliation can be tricky, because pride gets in the way, and people can say, I had nothing to do with it. It's not my problem. It's not my issue. I'm taking no responsibility. It's all on them. Well, and that might be true. Not usually. It's not usually just one-sided, but say taking the side of an affair, maybe you feel like you have done everything well and have done everything right, and maybe you have. But most of the time there's still areas that can be buoyed up and strengthened in the relationship. So let's kind of put that to the side for now, but I keep bringing that up simply because we are talking about reconciliation. So thing is, if you're in an argument, you need to admit you're wrong, and you need to work on the openness of conversation and what that might look like. You have to be open to hearing what that other person might say that you might not like. And so that's where, dealing with your internal emotions so that you don't get mad and start yelling and acting badly again, that might further damage the relationship. If you're asking the question, then you have to be willing to hear what's said. So I talk a lot about the Matthew principle, and this is the principle where, Jesus says, if you have aught against your brother, you go to your brother. That's the principle I talk about when I mention the Matthew principle. So the thing is that when we go to our brother, we have to create an environment of reconciliation. And to the person who is going forward, looking for reconciliation, creating that atmosphere is on you. If you're going to someone to say, hey, I know we had an argument and we are not good right now, but I want to try to work things out. Here's what you've done. Here's how I perceived what you've done. I want to work it through because I find that your relationship is valuable. I find that your friendship is valuable. Our marriage is valuable. I don't want to have this giant in the middle of our relationship. You create an atmosphere where reconciliation can take place. Coming in like a bull in a china shop is not going to save your relationship. Coming in with accusation and intolerance and pummeling of them, and that's not going to create an atmosphere where reconciliation is possible. So Jesus always spoke the truth, and he confronted hard things all the time. But he also made sure that the people around him knew that he loved them. He spoke in such a way that people felt the love. They knew that, Jesus was speaking into their heart, speaking into their situation. He healed people. And then he said, and as you go, sin no more, right? Or worse things are going to come upon you. They knew Jesus loved them. But he'd also confronted some hard things. He'd created an atmosphere of reception to what it was he said. And so because we are followers of Christ, because we are, created in his image, we too can do that. We can do that. Just make sure you're not walking in a manipulation when you do it, but opening that up for freedom of conversation. That other person has a right to their feelings. They have a right to their emotions. They have a right to the way that they're responding, even if at the end of the day you disagree with it, or even if in the end of the day it proves to be sinful, you can't tell them how they're supposed to respond. So you create the environment for reconciliation to be possible. So and the other thing I want to say is this: when you go to your brother, to make reconciliation or to have this conversation, to ask for forgiveness or to present, you've offended me, you've hurt me, this is what you've done. You need to go to have a conversation, not a confrontation. So there's a difference. You're going to have a conversation, not a confrontation. There's no battling of words. You're going to simply open it up and have a conversation. And some people you cannot do that with. And I know that from my own past experience. Sometimes you can open that door and you can go with the best of intentions. And as soon as you start the conversation, boom, there you are in the middle of this massive argument, and they're mad all over again and you're starting over. This is one of those places and one of those times where reconciliation might not be possible. And so, like I said at the beginning, you've been praying through this whole time, and you're going to do what the Lord has asked you to do and take the steps that He's asked you to take. You're going to do what He's asked you to do. And you're going to go and you're going to hope for the best. You're going to pray for the best. But you also only need to bring up those concerns and those points that you feel that are the big ones. Those are the main issues. You don't need to bring up, well, I didn't like your tone when you said this thing. Stick to the big issues, right? Like, you slandered me, you cheated on me, you lied about me, when you said that wasn't true, and all those people that were there, they believed what you said, and that hurt me, that damaged me deeply. You need to say that. Keep it to the big issues, not the small things, right? And then again, going back to your emotions, don't allow yourself to be sidetracked by your own emotions or other accusations that might be coming at you from the other person. So that can happen, right? People can get very defensive as soon as you come in and you start talking about something that, you need to bring up. That's an issue that needs to be addressed, and you start to have it. Most of the time, in my opinion and in my experience, people don't usually go, oh, you're right, I need to change that. It does happen sometimes, not very often, and the closer the relationship is, the less likely it is to happen. So the other thing is that when you go in to have this Matthew principle conversation, you need to know that you're going in not expecting an apology. And you're not going in expecting the relationship to be restored. You're going in full of prayer, full of the Holy Spirit. You're walking into a relationship that has blown up, a conversation, an argument that had erupted in between the two of you, and it's fractured your relationship. What you're doing is you're going in, and although you're not expecting these things, you're not expecting an apology, and you're not expecting a restored relationship, you are going to be going in to try to look at what we can do and to make a plan to how it is we're going to restore this relationship. So these are the things I want you to know, or you need to maybe take responsibility. Maybe it's you that needs to go, yeah, I realize I blew it, and I'm sorry. I said things I shouldn't have said, and I'm deeply grieved at that. Can we try to work this out so our relationship can be restored? It may never go back to the way that it was initially, but at the end of the day, you can have some restoration. You can have some reconciliation. So remember, and I'm going to end with this, remember that you might need to settle after all the dust has settled and after the conversation has been had, and you've worked hard, you prayed hard, you've maybe, been able to look at the things that were the big issue in the relationship. And the other thing I'll say is this: you have to find that relationship is valuable enough for you to continue into your next season. But remember, you might have reconciled relationship. You might have that. That might be exactly what happens. You might have a stronger relationship at the end of the day, but you have to go into it knowing and recognizing that you might need to settle for an amicable relationship as opposed to the close friendship that you had or the close relationship that you had, right? You might not get that. But, accept and thank the Lord for all that He does in the midst of you as you work this out in a godly manner. So I just want to thank you so much for being with me today, and sitting with me as we talk about this tough subject, because reconciliation is difficult, and sometimes it is possible and sometimes it is not. I will end by saying this. I knew a gentleman once who there was a person that there was some conversation there was some things that had happened, and I was willing to have a Matthew principle conversation, but don't, if you're on the outside of this relationship as a third party, don't try to force that. I was placed in a room with somebody who had no intention of making reconciliation, no intention of restoring relationship, no intention of admitting to any wrongs that had been committed, no intention of doing anything other than just continuing to walk away from the relationship. And you know what? That is a bad idea. You do not put two people in a room together and say, and this is what was said when they walked out the door, I want you to stay in here till you figure it out. Well, that wasn't really wise. and it didn't happen. And the thing is, it was triggering, and there was a lot of things that were said, and it just was not a good environment. And so if you're on the outside and you want to see two people that you love come back into a relationship after an argument or something that caused the relationship to be separated, I would say this: you need to sit down with each person individually, have a conversation, hear them both. Don't put your own slant on it. You have to be absolutely unbiased in this, because the reality is you don't know exactly what the truth is. You don't know exactly if somebody, because you can say something and it can sound one way. If you say, you can say, go do the dishes, or you can say, go do the dishes, right? So those two things hold different impact. But as a third party trying to bring reconciliation in between two people, you have to remain absolutely neutral. And so what that means, that when people are coming together and they're sitting down in your presence, you're going to keep the conversation flowing in a way that leads toward reconciliation, repentance, and forgiveness, right? That's your responsibility. And if that's difficult for you, and if you do want to take one person's side over another, it might not be wise for you to be the person that's trying to bring the reconciliation. That becomes kind of a messy ordeal, and it can further fracture relationships. So I just want to say thank you again so much for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, if you wouldn't mind hitting that little notification bell so you get everything that comes from this channel, and share this with other people. Please take the time to share it with people. I want these messages to go out far and wide. The people that are listening to me even right now and watching this, you're not the only person who struggles with this. You are not the only person who's had fractured relationships. You're not a bad Christian for having relationships that have failed in the past. You're not. And so I just want you to continue to hold on, and like I said, share. Thank you, because I think that these are valuable messages. And for those of you who have been listening, I've heard the same thing over and over. Great content. Thank you so much. These are such needed conversations in the body of Christ. And I agree. I think they are, because I think all of us are getting tired of just shoving things under the carpet. The carpet looks like a mountain now. So let's start to take some of that stuff up, deal with our own things, and work toward reconciliation with our brother and sister if possible. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will be seeing you next week, and have a great new year. It's the beginning of the year. Have a great and wonderful 2025, and enjoy what God is doing in your life. Amen.